Hi guys, eTrue64 here. Today we're going to talk about why I think the Star Wars prequels are better than the Disney Star Wars films. And no, I'm not drunk. I've actually thought about this a lot over the past year, and I'm confident that I can explain why the Star Wars prequels are better with one single point. To get to that point, I need to give some background for these movies and my opinions on them, because you need to know where I'm coming from. Without giving this first, I don't think my point will have as much weight behind it as I think it's going to need. Because, let's be honest, I'm traveling down dangerous territory here. So please be patient while we tread lightly down this path. But I think at the end, even if you don't necessarily agree with me, you'll have to admit that I have some really solid facts to back up my argument. So let's go ahead and kick this off. Alright, I want to start with the Disney Star Wars movies first. Now, I enjoyed The Force Awakens and still think the movie is pretty good, even if it is just a reskin of A New Hope. The new characters were interesting enough. Didn't necessarily go the way that I would have taken the series, but I was still hyped about it. It was a return to a more practical effects from the original trilogy, and it recaptured the same feeling that the original trilogy had as well. It set up a lot of potential for the new trilogy that Disney had promised. In addition to the new trilogy, we were also going to get Star Wars anthology movies, and the first one we got was Rogue One. Rogue One was a bit of a mixed bag. It had some potential, but it had no characters that you cared about. The one you probably cared about the most was K2SO, and it was a robot. It was a robot. You cared the most about a robot. There were also a bunch of strange edits during the first third of the movie, and what the hell was that tentacle monster? I don't even want to know what sick fantasies brought this monstrosity into the Star Wars universe. Get it out of here. The third act of Rogue One did redeem this one to a certain extent, and then after that we got The Last Jedi, the most decisive movie of all time. Even before this movie came out, even before the trailer, when this title dropped, I talked about how much I disliked the title. It completely contradicted what Lucas set up in Return of the Jedi, but I was still hyped to see Episode 8, even regardless. Then I watched it, and I'll admit that I liked it at first. My initial review, I actually defended a lot of points, but I also acknowledged what its weaknesses were. Canto Bight was always garbage. Holdo was always garbage. The way Poe was treated was garbage. Everything with Finn and Rose was garbage. And then I began to reflect on it more, and then I saw it a second time in theaters, and then I realized it was actually a bad movie. Not because of the performances, not because of the cinematography, but because the story was crap. And 80% of this movie didn't need to happen, or was just irrelevant to the plot. And the parts that were relevant to the plot were insulting to the legacy of Star Wars. This movie threw out everything that J.J. Abrams had set up for this new trilogy. Okay, let me put a placeholder on talking about The Last Jedi, but I promise we'll be back to this. Most recently, we got the second Star Wars anthology movie, Solo, a Star Wars story, and it wasn't terrible, but it was not to the level of Star Wars. It was dark and drab and added nothing to the overall saga of Star Wars. It was a completely disposable movie, and as evident by the box office returns, audience viewed it as disposable as well. And I can list multiple reasons why this might be. Let me break them down real quick. One, a lot of fans were still hating The Last Jedi, which had just released 6 months earlier. There was only a 6-month span between Last Jedi and Solo, so Star Wars fatigue was starting to become a thing. Two, fans were insulted by several of the creators at Lucasfilm on Twitter. And if you insult a huge portion of your customer base, they aren't going to show up and support your films. It's pretty basic stuff. If somebody calls you an a-hole, you're not going to go up to them and give them money for the privilege of them calling you an a-hole. Why would you do that? Number three, people didn't buy any kind of recast of Han Solo. Harrison Ford has cemented that role, and no matter who took it over, he wasn't going to be sufficient. Indiana Jones knew this, and Blade Runner knew this. You can't just recast Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford is Harrison Ford, and that's it. 4. The behind-the-scenes problems documented prior to its release. The directors were fired, acting coaches were brought in, and I'll get back to this point later when I actually make my main point. And number 5 is the fact that no one cared about seeing an origin story for Han Solo. Nobody needed to see this. Like I said, it's disposable. Nobody cared about the origin of Han Solo. What you saw in the original trilogy was sufficient that you need to know about his character. So take your pick of reasons as to why Solo failed, but it did fail, and it failed hard. There's no denying that, with an estimated loss of at least $80 million, with the exact number, including marketing, probably driving that cost up. Either way, this is the first Star Wars movie in history to actually lose money. Again, I'll get back to more reasons why this happened and my main point. Backtracking back to 1999, we have the first movie released in the prequel trilogy. Check out these reactions from the night of the premiere of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
I've been waiting 15 years since Return of the Jedi came out to see the prequel.
There's no way it's going to be a disappointment.
Are there any of you that think this is going to be a lousy movie? No! 10 loved it, 7 liked it or thought it was okay, and 2 are no longer Star Wars fans.
Fantastic. Go see it as quick as you can.
It was better than all of them.
I think the lightsaber battles were the greatest.
It was good, dude. It was really good.
So worth it. So worth it.
They're gonna love it. They're gonna go nuts. It was amazing.
I couldn't get enough of it. I want to see it again already.
I think that little Anakin Skywalker, and everyone's going to say it, stole that movie.
Thumbs up or thumbs down?
God, I'd put my feet up if I could.
Oh, and don't forget this guy.
Thumbs way down.
You didn't like it?
No, I think I deserve a public apology from George Lucas.
Obviously, most of these people were feeding off the overwhelming excitement and hype at the time, because it wasn't long until this entry would become the most hated in the franchise, and poor Jar Jar, one of the most hated characters of all time. The Phantom Menace is not a very good movie. The pod race is cool, but takes up entirely too much screen time. Young Obi-Wan isn't utilized enough. Trade negotiations are lame. And as I said, Jar Jar is a terrible attempt at comedic relief with multiple lowbrow poop jokes. He steps in poop. Come on, guys. The dialogue isn't very good or interesting. Young Jake Lloyd as Anakin is not given good direction. I don't even blame the kid. It's really George Lucas on there. But there are some redeeming qualities here. Darth Maul is an awesome villain, intimidating with few spoken words. Lightsaber fights are nothing we've ever seen before. Those were great. Naboo's actually a pretty cool planet, and we get to see Coruscant as well in our first look at a fully formed Jedi Council. They don't really do much in this movie, but it's the first time you see them. The Phantom Menace is not a good movie, but it set up things that were going to be important pieces as the prequel trilogy continued. Skipping on along to Attack of the Clones, there are some who place this as a worse movie than The Phantom Menace. I'm not one of them, though I certainly understand the argument. The dialogue between Anakin and Padme in this is some of the worst in any movie that I have ever seen, ever. Lucas tries to go for Shakespearean feel, but he fails so hard with lines like this.
I'm haunted by the kiss that you should never have given me. My heart is beating, hoping that that kiss will not become a scar. You are in my very soul, tormenting me.
So if you take out all the stuff with Anakin and Padme on Naboo, and if Lucas didn't go balls to the wall with the CGI effects, seriously, there are almost no practical sets in this entire movie. Everything's on a blue or green screen. Lucas just stuck the actors in front of a blue screen and said, hey, go at it.
Now you go under.
Under? This is ridiculous. This is just a mean joke. This isn't part of the movie.
If you take all that stuff away, the movie is pretty good. Obi-Wan chasing down the mystery behind the bounty hunter, taking us to Kamino and learning more about the clone army. Count Dooku and Jango Fett are introduced. The massive battle at the end where we see a ton of Jedi fighting together in something like a Roman gladiator arena. Yoda uses a lightsaber, which is the first time we've seen this. There's a lot of debate over whether we needed to see this, but it was kind of cool when you first saw it anyway. This kicked off the Clone Wars with a bang. And then came Revenge of the Sith. Most people would agree that this is the strongest of the three by far, and with good reason. It is not the most seamless transition to Darth Vader, and to be honest, the best scenes in the movie are the ones with no dialogue. John Williams' score adds more emotion than any dialogue that Lucas could ever write, ever. But the weight of all the fears and anger that Anakin has shown over the last 2 films builds over in this one, and the scene where Sidious tells Anakin of Darth Plagueis the Wise, that's just a great scene. And also the scene with Anakin when he attacks the Jedi Temple and kills all the younglings. The fight scene between Obi-Wan and Anakin on Mustafar, Goes on a bit long, but there's so much emotion and weight behind that fight. Lucas brought tons of great ideas into his prequels. He pulled from all different sorts of history and mythology and wrote them into the Star Wars saga. He grew the universe beyond the worlds and myths previously established in the Star Wars movies, and that is to be commended and appreciated. The main problem with the prequels is that they are directed by George Lucas himself. Lucas is one of the greatest storytellers of our generation, but he's not a very good director. He is infamous for giving directions like faster and more intense. What the hell does that mean? What kind of direction to give an actor is that? This kind of direction simply doesn't cut it. Lucas had a great story to tell with his prequels, and that story can be seen if you pick through the horrible execution. Lucas had no one on set to challenge him, everybody was a yes man, and he wasn't willing to give the directorial reins over to someone else. Empire Strikes Back was directed by Irvin Kershner, and most people agree that Empire Strikes Back is the best film in all of the Star Wars universe. So now that you have my thoughts on Disney Star Wars, as well as the prequels, I can finally make the point as to why the prequels are better, and that comes down to one simple reason. Direction. Not directing. Direction. Big difference. George Lucas had a clear plan in his prequels to tell a story. That story would span 3 movies and expand the understanding of the Star Wars galaxy and strengthen what we know about it. There was one single vision for a trilogy of movies that was brought to fruition. There was no plan for Disney Star Wars direction, and if you don't believe me, check out this Twitter post from Rian Johnson, who directed The Last Jedi. I'm sure they talked about where it might go early on, but when they came to me, there was no mapped story presented beyond The Force Awakens. This post in particular is important to understand that there was no plan for this trilogy, and therefore no plan for where Disney planned to take this franchise that they spent $4 billion to buy from George Lucas. More proof that there is no direction is to look behind the scenes. With The Force Awakens, J.J. Abrams successfully restarted the franchise. Not everyone's going to agree with that, but at the time, that was the general consensus. It was Rogue One that the problems started happening. This was directed by Gareth Edwards. What you may not know is a man called Tony Gilroy was brought in to do extensive reshoots of the film, including much of the third act. Most people noticed that the first trailer for Rogue One had tons of scenes that were not in the final cut of the film. One of the main scenes involving the main character running along the beach, that scene was completely cut from the film. Originally, there were also a few characters that actually survived the end of the movie. Tony Gilroy was brought in after Edwards' initial director's cut of the movie to fix it by Disney executives. Gilroy does have a screenplay credit in the film, but the extensiveness of his reshoots were kinda swept under the rug. I'm pretty sure you probably never even knew that happened. This comes back to my main point. There is no direction for these movies. There is no leadership. Gareth Edwards was hit with a release date and started filming with a broken screenplay. The story should have been hammered out prior to filming, but rather than wait, production started and much of the movie had to be reshot after the fact. Then you have The Last Jedi. I told you we'd be back to this. This is where things went off the rails. Rian Johnson was brought on to direct by Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy. Before this, everyone was under the assumption that J.J. Abrams was going to direct all 3 movies in this trilogy, including Rian Johnson, who was very surprised to receive the offer to direct and write The Last Jedi. Rian Johnson was honestly not qualified for this position, and he was given no guidelines. He had done only one movie at this point, Looper. I do like Looper. I think Looper's a pretty good movie, but it does not qualify this director to be on Star Wars. Not only was Rian Johnson directing this movie, as I said, he wrote The Last Jedi as well, with almost no oversight. So he threw out everything that J.J. Abrams set up for this new trilogy, and he was also given an undisclosed trilogy of his own that he tried to set up within the movie. Rian Johnson had not done anything yet, and he was already promised an additional trilogy on top of this one that he could do whatever he wanted with by Kathleen Kennedy. What the hell? Come on! Again, there is a distinct lack of direction. No one had a plan for this trilogy, and Kathleen Kennedy is handing out new trilogies to unproven directors who are writing their own screenplays with little to no oversight. Simon Pegg worked with J.J. Abrams on several projects, and obviously we know about Star Trek, and he relayed that J.J. Abrams was not happy with the direction that Rian Johnson took the new trilogy. So there's that. Then we get to Solo, a Star Wars story. Lord and Miller were the original directors of this film. This team also directed 21 and 22 Jump Street, as well as the Lego Movie. They shot over 70% of the Solo movie before being fired by Kathleen Kennedy. The firing was due to creative differences. Okay, sure. So then they brought in Ron Howard, and he reshot over 70% of the movie. Ron Howard was credited as a director on this movie. Lord and Miller were credited as executive producers. What? And then we get into episode 9, the upcoming film. So Colin Trevorrow was brought on to direct. He worked on this project for almost 2 years, writing 2 versions of the script that were both denied by Kathleen Kennedy. He planned on taking a 3rd stab at it, but was removed from the project, and J.J. Abrams was brought in to direct and rewrite the script from scratch. What? So it's evident by all these hirings and all these firings, the creative changes and directions, the filming and release schedules, there is no direction at Lucasfilm. There is no direction for Disney Star Wars. There is no plan. There is a machine pushing out half-assed products and hoping that the title Star Wars on it will be enough for people to buy it. And when the fans push back on this, they are labeled as a toxic fan base. Insulting your fan base is not going to help your cause. Come on, guys. This isn't how you run a company. This isn't how you run the biggest brand in all of entertainment. Star Wars was once a juggernaut, and now it's a Jawa. I know it's a bad analogy, but that's what I came up with. Say what you want about the prequels, and I would most likely agree with you. They aren't good films, except for Revenge of the Sith, but they had a direction, there was a purpose behind it. Lucas had more to add to the galaxy that he created, and he did it. He wasn't interested in pumping out a product. He was a storyteller that wanted his story told in the galaxy that he created. I can tell you that I grew up dreaming of getting a chance to be involved with a Star Wars film in any kind of way. I watch the documentary Empire of Dreams as often as I rewatch the movies, and I do recommend you checking that out. I'll throw it up here so you know. I love the idea of being a part of these films. I dreamed of being able to write a screenplay or manage a camera on set or just be one of those background aliens in a canteen. I just wanted to be a part of this thing. But now, I want to stay as far away from these films as possible. Why would any creative person want to be a part of a company that is so indecisive that it hires and fires people constantly? A company that doesn't care what its fans have to say, a company that is not interested in telling good stories but simply pushing out a product and meeting release dates. What? Why would you want to be a part of that? I personally think the prequels are better than Disney Star Wars because of the reasons that I've cited in this video. The new movies have better effects, they have better cinematography and better dialogue, but they forgot the most important thing, which is the story and the characters. The 2 most important things in any film or any story that anybody's ever going to say. You need a solid story that's going to excite us. You need characters that we're going to care about. That's what you need. 2 things. Alright. So thank you guys so much for joining me on this video. Hopefully I avoided all the landmines and made my point accurately. Please let me know what you think about the prequels and the new Disney Star Wars in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe, or don't. I'm not a beggar. I'm Geek264, and I'll always tell you the truth.